Hey guys, in this video I'm going to go over some workflow tips and tricks for FlowCanvas to help you learn better ways, more efficient ways to work with it, as well as the tools that are at your disposal. So in FlowCanvas, you can actually comment sections of your flow graph very easily. So this is really important when you see, for instance, we have this very complicated amount of nodes, and at face value, it can be very difficult to understand what's going on. We have a few hints by looking at the name of the variables and seeing, what's kind of happening here. But having to stop and read every time is really not ideal. So in order to make it a lot easier to understand, let's add some comments to the graph. So to do this, hold down the Control key, then drag on the graph, and you see that box that's formed, that will create a comments box like that, see? Right click to delete it. And if I drag it over these nodes, it actually contains these nodes, right? And now when I move that comment box, it actually moves the nodes with it. You see, we can comment an entire block. So we could say, comment this, and this is going to say increase growth rate when up key is pressed. Now I can do the same for this. So decrease growth rate when down key is pressed. All right, now one cool thing about this as well is I can press auto size here. And when I press auto size, it means that even if I move nodes or I add new nodes, let's say I add this one. So to add it, I just drag it in there, and now it's part of that group. It will automatically resize, and I don't need to worry about manually changing the size. Of course, you can always manually change it by grabbing that little arrow there. And I can remove nodes from it by grabbing the nodes and moving them out like that, and they're no longer constrained. Now, another thing I can do is I can right click and I can edit the color of these. So let's say in my project, I want to enforce a rule where anytime we use input from the player, I want designers to make the color of this red. So I can go into here, change that, and make it whatever kind of red I want. You can also use the alpha channel here. So let's just make it a really kind of dim red like that. I'll just copy that. Edit the color on this one. Paste it in. There we go. And what this means is that now from a glance, when a designer looks at the graph, they can say, oh, okay, so the red ones are input from the player. Good, I got that. And you can see down here as well, we have those marked in that color on our little overall map of the graph. We can also add additional comments. If you right click and say make notes, you see this little section here. You can make additional notes. So for example, in this case, make sure the growth rate is kept between 1 and 100. Basically some additional information for anyone who's going to read it, whether it's yourself in the future or someone else who's working along with you. Now, of course, these boxes don't have to contain an entire block of nodes. It can be segmented across multiple nodes. So for example, here, we have a very complicated sequence of nodes, which are basically calculating how much a plant should grow every update cycle. So what I want to do is I want to basically communicate to whoever's reading this what we're doing at every step of the way. So holding control, dragging here, I'm going to say updates the total elapsed time. All right. Then the next section, I'm going to say converts the elapsed time to hours in the day, then outputs true if the time is between 6 a.m. and 6 p.m. So then here, I'm going to say calculates the light intensity based on the time of day. Then here, calculates the growth rate, adds growth to the plant, then finally sets harvestable or rotten variables. So you can see the advantage is that now I don't have to go through and read every node to understand what it's doing. I can simply read the top and I should get an idea of what it's doing. When I find there's a problem with this section of the graph, I can very easily isolate it and see what's going on. So in addition, I can also draw a box around the entire thing. Name this maybe update cycle, change the color to something I want, make notes, and I can make some more detailed notes about what this is doing. Now, I don't think you need to go overboard with these. I think, in fact, we don't need this comment box itself, but it's good to know that you can have them wrapped around each other. So sometimes when your graph gets very big, you can have trouble finding things. And so for that purpose, there's actually this nice graph explorer here. So in the graph, you see this little magnifying glass. If you click that, you see it comes up and it shows everything in a flat hierarchy, everything in the node. You see as I scrub over, it actually highlights these like that. And you can search here. So let's say I want to search all cases where I refer to the rotten variable. So I have it there, and I have it down here. So this is very useful for when you have big graphs and you really need to find where a variable or a function or a type of node has been used. In addition to these box kind of comment sections here, you can actually add comments directly onto nodes. So when you click this, you see there's a comments section here where I can say, this is the only update we should have in this flow. And you can also add a tag. Now then, let's say we have a part of the flow that's a little bit kind of old. We don't want to use it anymore. What I could do here is I could tag old, old. And what's really nice here is that when I go into my search tool here, the Graph Explorer, I can actually search for old and I can see which ones to be marked old. So this can be really useful for making sure that you maybe don't delete logic that you are not sure if you will need in the future or not, but making sure that when you do have time to clean up, you can find it very easily and just destroy it. Next, I want to talk about how to organize some of the lines that are coming in here. So one problem that we can see here is that this bold line, which represents the flow, goes through here, it goes into this node here, but it doesn't actually go into this node. It's actually behind it, you see? However, this could be quite confusing. So you can either move these down like this. That's no problem. Make sure they're out of the way of the flow. But in some cases, it's not really ideal to do that, and especially when there's multiple flows coming through. So what you can do is you can use the identity node here. Basically allows you to move your flow line into a more desirable location so it does not get interrupted by your other nodes. This is really useful. In some cases, you'll find that you'll have a situation like this where you have many nodes which are leading into a common node. And this can get really messy when this is all over the place, like this, for instance. So to help with this, we can use a merge node. So I just search for merge, and now I can lead all of these into here instead, like that. And in fact, here, I actually want to merge these two up here, and I want to merge these two down here. So I'm going to copy that, and I'm going to change the port count here to be 2, and the port count here to also be 2. Remove these. There we go. So now these are merged together. These are merged together. And now that can just lead into there, and that can lead into there, and we have less of a mess over here. So that's the merge node. Now there may also be situations where you have too much of a kind of unrelated, like the values are not being passed through, but you want behavior to happen, such as this, right? So in this case, I'm just using the log text as an example for doing something, doing another thing, and doing something else. So we have these three, which are not actually going to take inputs from the previous flows, right? And what we can do for this instead is we can use a split node. So I will go into the split node here, then call this, then call this, and finally call this, and change my ports to show 3. And that way what we can see is that we've got this order, so it will always work in order. It will do the log of do something, then it will do the log of do another thing, and then it will finally do doing something else. And this can be a bit easier to read because we know that these do not depend on each other to manipulate any data. So this is easier to... So when we look at this, we can actually see, okay, well, these don't rely on each other. They're just standalone function calls that we want to do after this point. And this can be beneficial for making your graphs a bit easier to understand. When working collaboratively with people on a project, usually you want to copy your code back and forth. It's not ideal to just send a screenshot of these nodes and say, hey, here's how you can fix your problem. You can see the entire JSON of your graph by looking at this show JSON. Here we go. This is the entire graph, and that can be imported to someone else's Unity just by using import JSON. So you can import, you can export including subgraphs, and you can just show the JSON. So this is a very useful workflow tool that should help you collaborate a lot more effectively. Now, one other great thing is that you have a bunch of preferences, so you can change certain visual elements of the graph to match your workflow. So let's have a look at a few of these. So one of the most important ones, I think, is the connection style, because this can define how you lay your nodes out. So you see here, we've got the hard connection style, but I can change it to be soft, softer, or even direct. And that can help for determining how you would prefer to lay out your graph. You can also do other things such as toggling the grid on and off, grid snapping, determining which events actually get logged, and even animating this inspector panel, whether it animates on or immediately comes on. All right, so let's have a look at the graph console. So you can open the console by pressing this button here. And this is going to basically output from your graphs. So all graph-related logs. So in this case, I have here, when I become rotten, I'm going to log some text. And when I become harvestable, I'm also going to log some text. So let's play. See here, now it's become daytime, so the plant is growing, has become harvestable, and it elapsed further and became rotten. So this is a really good way to debug your graph, what's going on. You can add, obviously, these logs anywhere. So the graph console is also a great way to catch errors that come in. So for example, let's say we have a merge flow, and I change this to be now 2 ports. You can see here, we get an error, and it shows us here on the graph. So no matter where we are, if I press this, it will frame it and show us what's going on. Now, it's generally pretty easy to figure out when you have errors in your graph without even going into runtime. But let's see what it looks like in runtime as well. So when I grab the sprite renderer, let's set color to whatever. And you see this looks okay. And if I play, there's no problem. However, if I were to remove that sprite renderer, you see the self variable actually goes red to indicate it has not found a sprite renderer on this object. And if I play now, you see the whole node actually goes red, and you can see that in the overall map as well. You can see it's covered in red. And if I open the console, I get this here. So it should be very easy to figure out where the problem is and what the problem is. All right, so I want to show you how macros work. So macros are nice because you can reuse macros across multiple flow graphs. So to make a macro, I can select all of this, right-click, convert to macro, yes, choose where I want to put it. So here I'm going to say check if day or night, save. And you see I have this nice node here, which is named check if day or night. And if I double click this, it goes into this macro, which you can see is here. So you see this is my main graph, this is my macro. You see here, it takes in this value, it comes out and it returns a true or a false. And I can reuse that same macro just by dragging it into here. So I can reuse this in this graph or any other graph I want. A very useful feature that can save a lot of time as well as make your code a lot more modular and a lot more reusable and less error prone because of that. What's also amazing about macros is that you can change this. So let's say I want to change this to now be between 8 a.m. and 10 p.m. Or let's say I want to add some complicated code for daylight savings or calculating the actual sunrise and sunset. I can do that inside here in a very isolated graph without worrying about finding everywhere where it's used. I can also modify the input and outputs of this. So let's say I require an additional value input. I can add a new value input. Let's say Boolean. Let's say like daylight savings, account for daylight savings. And now I have access to that there. And if I go to my main graph and press refresh, here we go. I can now pass in the account for daylight savings. And same for if I added an additional value output or even an additional flow output. Hit refresh, and there we go. So we can update that very easily. And also if I removed, let's say I no longer wanted to support this, I can remove that. Fix errors inside here. Go back to my game object, refresh, and you see here, because that flow no longer exists, it's giving me this error. I can delete that and pass it in like that. So we can very easily refactor our macros. So one other great feature that we can use to help us scale our graphs or to help us collaborate is we can use the Refactor tool here. So let's have a look at an example. So I have a test script here, and inside here you see I have a basic function, set color. And if I drag it in here, I look for the set color, there it is, connect it up, there we go. So that's fine. However, let's say in the future, we find that actually we want to be able to set color of individual parts. So let's say set the stalk color and set the petal color. And this function becomes obsolete. So we've deleted it. We've just refactored our code. So you see here we get a missing method error. And in fact, if you go into your graph console, you will see you have that there. And any graph that shares that will have that error, and by clicking it, it will take you right there. So how do we fix it? Well, we have this really cool tool here, these little curly brackets, to open graph refactor, press gather, and you see here, it has found the reflected information of that function. So right now it's set color, and I want to make it set petal color. So I do that, I save, and there we go. We've restored along with all the parameters and everything. So the refactor is very, very useful, but you do have to also be aware that when you refactor that you will need to do this operation in order to fix missing references. But the graph console is there for that, to help you find them very easily. All right, so that's that for this workflow tips and tricks video. Hopefully some of these tips will be very helpful to you or help you understand better, more efficient ways to use FlowCanvas.